Hi, well, good morning, everyone. I'm Rob Atkinson, President of Information Technology Innovation Foundation. I want to welcome you to, I think, a very interesting event and unveiling a very compelling proposal this morning to accelerate university technology transfer and commercialization into the commercial marketplace in the U.S. What I'm going to do is introduce our speakers and presenters. I'll make a few opening remarks, and then because Tom Khalil has to leave and go run our nation's innovation policy after he shapes it, Tom's going to go first and make some remarks, and then if Congressman will be joining us, and given his schedule, I think when he comes, we'll turn it over to him as well. And at some point, we'll hear from Christina with the core message. So let me start by...
big build-up, though.
Big build-up. Well, George can go ahead before Christina, too. We'll let Christina answer questions. So let me start with Tom, who probably doesn't need an introduction. Tom is Deputy Director for Policy at OSU. Is actually on leave now from UC Berkeley, where he was Special Assistant to the Chancellor for Science and Tech. Conceived a number of interesting programs out there, including a program called Big Ideas at Berkeley, which provides support for multidisciplinary teams of students interested in addressing key societal challenges. In 2007 and 2008, Tom was chair of the Global Health Working Group for the Clinton Global Initiative. And in the Clinton administration, he was Deputy Assistant President for Science and Technology and Economic Policy, and Deputy Director of the NEC. So he has a long background in Washington in technology policy and is a real leader on all of these issues. I'll introduce Congressman Wu, even though he's not here yet. Congressman Wu is in his sixth term as a member from Oregon, represents Portland out to the Oregon coast, and he is on the Education and Labor Committee, where he focuses on education policy, and he serves on the House Science Committee, where he has jurisdiction over research and technology policy at NASA, and he's also chair of the Science and Technology Subcommittee on Technology Innovation. And he has a background in law and was had a law firm that supported high-tech firms out in Oregon. And if you don't know Congressman Wu, he really is an amazing member of Congress, totally committed to science and innovation policy, so we're really honored to have him this morning. Christina Holly, who is the featured speaker this morning. Christina is, or she goes by Z. The speaker is the Vice Provost for Innovation at USC. And the Executive Director of the USC Stevens Institute for Innovation. This is a university-wide institute in the Office of the Provost that harnesses the creative thinking and innovative work at the University of Southern California's different 17 colleges and professional schools. But prior to that, she was the founding director of the MIT Deshpande Center for Technological Innovation. If you don't know this center, I encourage you to look at it. There was a recent report that the Kauffman Foundation issued on MIT and what an innovation entrepreneurial engine it is. And that was certainly no small part of Christina's leadership. I think the reason, though, she's not at MIT anymore is that she's an avid surfer, and I think it's hard to surf at Cape Cod, but good to surf in LA. So. Unfortunately, Deshpande, who was going to be joining us, came down with a bad case of the flu and called last night and extended his apologies. He unfortunately won't be able to make it, but we wish him well. And finally, George Bradenberg on my far right. George, many of you know from his days at AOL, where he, until 2003, was strategic advisor at AOL Time Warner, and had served in a number of senior executive positions at AOL, Time Warner, and AOL Time Warner and Time Warner. He has a long background in the entertainment industry, was senior vice president and general counsel of CBS Inc. and executive vice president of Fox. Since that time, since 2003, he's been sort of the epitome of what we want in this country of civic activists. He has been involved in many of the important efforts in the Washington, D.C. region to spur activities and innovation. For example, he's on the board, chairman of the board of the Phillips Collection, He's also serves as the vice chairman of the Chesapeake Crescent Initiative, and that's the context he'll be talking this morning. This is an initiative of public-private collaboration involving DC, Maryland, and Virginia that focuses, among other things, on spurring technological commercialization. So let me just start by just making a few comments, and I'll turn it over to Tom. Actually, you know what? I'm going to turn it over to Tom now because you leave at 9:30. So Tom, why don't you give us your thoughts? Actually, let me take 1 minute just so that your comments are a little bit of context, because I don't want to preclude what Christina's going to do. But the context of what we're going to talk about this morning is a proposal that Christina and her colleagues around the country have proposed, and there's a copy of it out there. It's a program called Impact. And the essential idea there is to have the federal government with a small amount of investment early on to create a pilot program to leverage and get really best practice in university technology commercialization. We've got some good programs here and there. The challenge for this country is to raise many of the universities to a much higher level, and that's really what we're going to talk about today. So Tom, do you want to start off?
Sure, and it's a pleasure for me to be here, and I want to thank you for the invitation. And I particularly want to thank Z and our colleagues for their proposal. And although it's not something that the administration has an official position on yet, it certainly is aligned with a number of the administration's priorities. First of all, as you know, President Obama recently released a national innovation strategy which focused on the need to invest in the building blocks of long-term economic growth and job creation, including research and human capital and 21st century infrastructure, to create the right environment for private sector investment through making the research and experimentation tax credit permanent, a targeted reduction in capital gains for long-term investments in small businesses, export control reform, increasing U.S. exports, and finally, harnessing science, technology, and innovation to address national priorities, whether that's accelerating the transition to a low-carbon economy or using health information technology as a way of reducing administrative costs and medical errors. Although there are a number of reasons why the federal government invests in research at research universities, we do so, for example, to expand the frontiers of human knowledge as an end in itself. Clearly, one of the reasons that we do so is to serve as an engine of economic growth and job creation. And I think this proposal would help meet that goal. And there are a number of things, other things that are attractive about it. First of all, it builds on U.S. strengths. The fact that we do have world-class research universities. Depending on what ranking you look at, we have 17 of the top 20. And we also have an entrepreneurial culture. It also would leverage some investments that the president is committed to making, whether that's doubling the research budgets of key science agencies like the National Science Foundation, Department of Energy's Office of Science, NIST, and increasing support for biomedical research through the National Institutes of Health, or tripling the number of NSF graduate research fellowships. As Rob mentioned, and as Christina will talk about, there are a number of universities across the country that are doing really interesting things. I hope Christina talks about what she's doing at USC. Another interesting model that Christina was involved in launching is the Deshpande Center that provides a couple of different types of support. One is for proof of concept activities. That is how you, let's say some faculty and students have come up with a potentially commercially important breakthrough, but the technology is still too immature for a venture capitalist or an angel investor or a company to be willing to invest in it to spin it off. These types of proof of concept centers can help accelerate the transition of ideas from the lab to the marketplace and address the so-called value of death that often exists in early stage technology development. These centers can also help build a very strong network of outside experts with business expertise for faculty and students who, again, may have something that is potentially commercially relevant, but they may not have an idea about what is the first application that their technology should be seeking to address. And a lot of times when faculty will go out to venture capitalists and say, well, this is a platform technology, can slice and dice, then the venture capitalist will say, well, tell me when you figured out what the first market you're going to address is. And a lot of times, faculty may not have a clue about that. They just know that they have got something interesting, and they may not have a sense for what are the technical milestones and figures of merit that they're going to have to meet before something becomes commercially relevant. The other thing I like about this proposal is that it is relatively straightforward to implement. A lot of times, when you're in a policy-making role, and one of our jobs at the White House is to serve as policy entrepreneurs, and so in the same way that venture capitalists are looking for high-quality deal flow, we're interested in high-quality idea flow. And we're always interested in evaluating a proposal along a couple different axes. Does this advance the president's agenda? But also, what's the potential impact of this idea, and how difficult would it be to do? And a lot of times, people have good ideas, but for one reason or another, it might be politics or the cost or the administrative difficulty of implementing something. It will be very difficult to actually execute on it. And the other thing I appreciate about this is that it's well thought through, and it would be relatively easy to execute. A couple of things that I think are worthy of some additional consideration. One is, how would these centers look different depending on what region of the country that we're talking in? So a lot of the success stories are in those universities that are surrounded by a very rich ecosystem of big companies, small companies, venture capitalists, angel investors, serial entrepreneurs, a real depth of technology management expertise. And so the question is, how would we envision these types of centers working in a region that did not have the sort of innovation ecosystem that you see in some parts of the country and not others? I think that leads to a second question, which is that I think the objectives of these centers should not just be to focus on venture-backed startups, although that's would certainly be part of the mission of these activities, but also to strengthen the relationships between university and industry more broadly. Because certainly a technology transition path is not just new companies, but closer relationships between university and industry more broadly. Finally, I think a key issue is going to be for the success or failure of these activities are actually the executive directors, the people who are really charged with running these. And so, one question is whether we can clone Z, or whether there's some other scalable method that we can have to really, recruit and retain and develop a cadre of people that are interested in making this happen. It's my experience, for example, that while a focus on intellectual property and traditional tech transfer is one of the elements of making this happen, that it's certainly not the only one. And so I don't think that you necessarily want to have these centers all staffed by people who look at this solely from the point of view of licensing. Because I think the goal of these centers should be to maximize the impact of the research as opposed to a short-term maximization of the revenue that a university gets. And that technology transfer is really a contact sport. It really, a lot of times the technology transfer doesn't occur just because someone knocks on the door of a TTO and licenses some intellectual property. It occurs more often than not when the faculty and students who were involved in the development of the technology get personally involved. And so I think a broader appreciation of the ways in which university and industry can cooperate is very important. So again, I want to thank Z for all the work that she did on this, and I hope that this is an idea that we could move on relatively quickly.
So we got time for a couple of questions?
Sure, absolutely.
Before we do that, if there's a bunch of folks in the back, please come on up and sit down. There may be other people that come in. There's lots of chairs up here. So if you could identify yourself, please, and ask a question.
Yes, Jeff Mervis with Science. Just, Tom, picking up on your last point, and maybe Z also wants to ask, to the extent that you need to build a awareness in the community and train people who are able to do this, do you think that needs to be a bigger focus, and therefore an agency like NSF, who has those ties with universities, might be more appropriate for advancing this kind of goal? I wanted to get your sense of whether you think there's enough people already at enough of these universities to make these centers happen, or whether you need to build up a technical, trained workforce.
I think that's a good question. I think that the experience of some of these centers is that actually recruiting people from outside a university who have had real experience in the entrepreneurial or corporate or venture world is important for making these things a success. But it has to be clearly somebody who is comfortable in boundary spanning activities. So you don't want to have someone who comes in and has no appreciation for the way a university works either. So I think you need someone who are, sort of comfortable understanding the, one of Z's colleagues talks about 3 definitions of ROI. For a university professor, it's research of interest. For a government funding agency, it's results of importance, and for a company, it's return on investment. And so understanding how you align those 3 different definitions of return on investment might be a good working definition of what somebody in these positions has to be able to do.
Any other? Yes, ma'am. Can you hold on?
Martha Conley from the University of Maryland.
Wait till you grab the mic, please.
Okay, sure. Many universities appreciate your comments about the TTOs, and many of them have that function and it's been well established. And then the next step they do is go build a research park. And we like to think of sort of a linear progression from a technology going from lab to a sustainable enterprise. And that gap in the middle is really, I would submit that universities are ill-prepared to address that through either proof of concept, through early stage spinning out of companies, through angel investments. What's your feeling of how prepared U.S. universities are to address that issue?
I'm going to let Z handle that one in her talk, because I think she's got a better feel for that than I do. So.
Maybe last question, Scott.
By Dole, do you see reform issues as part of this process? And I'm thinking particularly when you have the handoff between a research university and a commercial lab. Often that can be adversarial, can be a huge time delay, wasting asset, and it turns what should be a partnership into sometimes something that's not. Not that Bayh-Dole hasn't done a great job, but are people looking at perhaps what comes next after the existing law that's, I guess since the reform, since like 20 years old?
Yeah, so I guess I would distinguish between whether it's necessary to make legal or regulatory changes, and whether there are a set of, I don't like to use the word best because I think that applies a level of certainty that we may not have, but certainly promising practices. And my view is that the role that IP plays can vary widely depending on the sector. So a policy that the University of California adopted in the IT sector was to say that faculty should be allowed to make their intellectual property available on a non-exclusive royalty-free basis on the grounds that that given that IP was used primarily for defensive purposes in the IT sector, that the non-exclusive royalty-free approach was actually the way to maximize the impact of the research. I think one could make a credible argument that in the area of small molecules, it's difficult to see how a drug company is going to invest all resources that are required to get something through the regulatory approval process and demonstrate that it's safe and efficacious in the absence of some defensible IP. So I think that what's complicated about intellectual property is that although it would be nice to have one template that you could use for every university-industry interaction, I think that given the different role that IP plays in different sectors, I do think that you have to have different approaches, but that the university should be motivated by the goal of maximizing the impact of the research. And the exact way to do that is going to depend on the circumstances.
All right. Tom, thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule. We appreciate you being here and answering questions.
Thanks so much.
So this reminds me a little bit of the movie Memento, if anybody's ever seen that movie. It starts in the back, goes to the front. So I'm actually going to go back to the front and say, okay, why do we care about this? I didn't really think I needed to do this, but I was talking to somebody the other day about this inventions proposal, and I said, well, hey, our intervention system works fine. Where's the problem? I don't think our intervention system works fine. I think it works okay, but we released a report in February that Anish Chopra cites all the time now, where there's a report called the Atlantic Century, where we benchmarked the U.S. against 39 other nations or multinational regions on innovation-based competitiveness. So everything from corporate R&D, government R&D, scientists and engineers, venture capital, a whole set of things. We're not number one anymore. We're number 6. But really more disturbingly, we benchmarked change from the early 1999 or 2000 to the most recent year we could get. And when we benchmark change, the U.S. is 40th out of those nations. So we are dead last on making progress in this area. So I do think we have a lot of strengths, as Tom alluded to. We also have a lot of challenges. For example, between 91 and 2003, I'm going to update this data, but this most recent we could get about a year ago. Corporate R&D went up 7.3%. Which actually, by the way, corporate R&D has gone down as a share of GDP since then. First time in U.S. history that's ever happened. It just went down for a few years. The share of basic research, though, is down 2.5%. And the share of applied research by U.S. corporations is down 4.8%. So in other words, companies are doing more R&D, or at least it's stable, but that's shifting over to development. You look at venture money, and it's the same thing. Venture has grown, although it's a little stagnant right now. It's grown, but at the same time, venture money is shifting to larger deals and later stage deals. There's half the amount of money in venture in first stage, 0 stage and first stage than there was 15 years ago. And so that suggests that the university system and the federal lab system is a more important engine of our innovation system than it was. Another data point on that is a report that Fred Block and Michael Keller released for us this last summer in 2008 called Where Do Innovations Come From? Transformations in the U.S. Innovation System, which is out there. Basic one sort of sentence factoid In the 70s and 80s, most innovations came from big companies acting on their own. Today, most innovations, about 2/3, come from collaborative partnerships, many of them involving universities. So the whole innovation system has become more collaborative. Companies are looking now to universities and federal laboratories to be able to do more. And so that's why I think this issue is so critical, why we have to really take universities to the next level. Many of them are doing a great job, like USC and MIT, but we really need to get more of them at that level and to figure out, as Tom said, maybe not best practices, but very good practices. Lastly, if you just look at universities themselves, they're becoming a much more important driver of innovation. Between 91 and 2004, patent applications by universities increased fourfold, licensing income increased almost fourfold, and new startups increased by more than double. So universities are playing a bigger role. Companies are looking to them more, and so I think it's a really opportune time now to take this next step. We're really happy to be joined by Congressman Wu, and thank you for joining us. And as I said, we're going to, I know you need to run, and there are votes probably, so I will, if you'd like, I'll let you go next. But I actually introduced you, but there are a bunch of people who weren't here, so I'm going to introduce you again. You deserve 2 introductions. So Congressman Wu is in the 6th term in the House. He represents Oregon's 1st congressional district, which is Portland and all the high-tech part of western Portland, if you know that area where Intel is, all the way up to the coast. He serves on the Education Labor Committee and also on the Science Committee. He's chair of the Science and Technology Subcommittee, chair of the Science and Technology Subcommittee on Technology and Innovation. And his focus is on high-tech research and how do we do more of that. And that really is Congressman Wu's background. He has a distinguished legal career. In '88, he co-founded a law firm, Cohen and Wu, and its specialty was representing the high-tech industry and small technology companies in Oregon. So he's played a key role, understands this whole concept of innovation and commercialization and how to make it work. And in my view, is really one of the leaders in the House on getting this whole notion of not just science, but science and innovation. So we're very pleased to have him join us, and please join me in welcoming Congressman Wu.
Thank you very much, Robert, and I apologize for joining in progress here, and it is my intention to stay as long as possible, let me get to that part in just a second, because it has to do with the sausage making that we do around this place. Innovation must be a hot topic these days, because Robert and I are having breakfast or dinner together at least once a week, and we've been doing that for the past several months. In addition to the healthcare agenda that everybody hears about in the broadband press, if you will, we are working on an innovation agenda. The speaker has been a real leader in that. She was into high-tech before high-tech was cool, because of her background in the Silicon Valley and long-term relationships there. I have been working on SBIR reauthorization, a Small Business Innovative Research Grant reauthorization for the last 2 Congresses, and I will apologize to all the Senate staffers who are here. We have had a challenging set of negotiations between the 2 chambers in coming to accord. There's agreement across a broad band of issues, but there are some remaining issues to be resolved, such as the participation, the legitimate and degree of participation by venture capital funded companies in SBIR. And to the extent that I need to step away in a little bit, it is because, get this, I need to sign a Department of Defense or Defense reauthorization bill, because in the kind of sausage making that we do around here, one of the avenues of approach was to stick the Small Business Innovative Research Grant reauthorization onto the defense reauthorization. It was the Senate bill which is attached to DOD, we had some interesting negotiations about how much of that should stay in the defense bill. At the end of the day, the broadband, the broader SBIR reauthorization is not in the DoD bill. There is a reauthorization for 1 year of the defense SBIR program, or the DoD SBIR program, and again, that's the compromise that we came to. It's acceptable to the Senate, acceptable to me. It doesn't make sense that an innovation program is attached to a defense bill, but hey, hate crimes bill is attached to it also. So, the legislative process is inherently conservative. It's like the conservation of DNA. You don't want to mess with it too much, but the process can get frustrating as you try to move various pieces of legislation along. Aside from SBIR, I want to just mention Stevenson-Weidler and Bayh-Dole. These are pieces of legislation which have been around since the early 80s. And they were not passed in good economic times. They were passed in times of severe economic distress. And yet, they kicked off several decades of strong innovation from our research universities. I remember that time. I was just starting in high-tech legal practice, and what I viewed, and I think what many of our panelists would view as a shocking comment from Washington, D.C., is that it doesn't matter what you make. Potato chips, silicon chips, it's all the same. If you can get economic value out of it, that's all that counts. I don't subscribe to that view. Robert has been arguing forcefully that we need to retrain economists here in Washington, D.C., so that we no longer view the things that we do economically in purely financial terms, that it makes a difference what you invest in and what the ecology of businesses is around the things that around which you make major investments. Just to lay out something provocative for our university friends, we're not going to do anything major on Stevenson-Weidler or Bayh-Dole. But looking at it after a multi-decade period, one might legitimately inquire, what are some of the things that we could tweak to make the tech transfer and innovation process work better? It was a revolutionary concept to vest the intellectual property in university. Is that the right place to vest that property? And again, this is just a concept, but would it make even more sense to vest the property in PIs? Would the process work better, or would it not work as well? I have been part of the university tech transfer process my whole legal career, and I think that some of these basic questions need to be asked along with the smaller tweaks that one might consider. In the private sector, there has been a lot of discussion of technology transfer from universities as a source of additional funding for universities. And I think that many of you in this room know better than that. There are a few money-making programs around the country. And by and large, those money-making programs have a large base to work from and have a few big money-maker patents. The vast majority of programs are not big money makers for their respective institutions. And I submit to you that tech transfer programs at universities should really be viewed as a service for the faculty and also a service for the public in that these are, by and large, projects funded either by tax dollars or by the residue of monopoly profit, and therefore the public has a legitimate expectation that some of those benefits should flow downstream and create jobs, new services, and new products. Now, I also want to touch upon something that I think Robert will be focusing on through ITIF maybe 2 or 3 months down the pike, which again goes to the theme of what you choose to focus on technologically makes a difference in the economic ecosystem, that potato chips and silicon chips are not the same and don't have the same consequences for the economy. The other concept that is being discussed today is a body of work done by a few business school professors and a few economists. The body of work that I'm familiar with, it has been done by Erica Fuchs at Carnegie Mellon University, which finds that at least in certain limited fields, where you do the manufacturing has a strong feedback loop on the kind of technology, the nature of the technology that will be spurred in the following sense. If you have a cutting edge technology that depends on a close relationship with the research scientists, with the PhDs in the company or at a university, you need a close relationship. If you take that early manufacturing, if you will, or that cutting edge manufacturing, and you offshore it, you take it to China or India or somewhere else, frequently that leading edge manufacturing will not survive in that environment. And what you wind up with is the old technology being manufactured more cheaply. And in turn, those cheaper products, if you will, come home to the United States and outcompete the rest of the market that stayed here in the United States with cutting edge technology. So the cycle in those particular, and these are studies of narrow industries, but the cycle is if one of the small competitors offshores their manufacturing, the nature of the feedback loop is such that you will get a older generation technology coming back into the domestic market and it chokes off the most cutting edge technology. These concepts that the site of manufacturing makes a difference to technology development, and that what you choose to manufacture, whether it's potato chips or automobiles or computer chips, that it really makes a difference. It's contrary to some of the accepted economic dogma, but I think that these are concepts that we are coming to believe fairly strong. I wanted to lay those at your doorstep, and to the extent that I can participate in the discussion later on, I'd be happy to discuss some of the funding issues, some of the education and training issues, and some of the particular legislative concepts that we are trying to work on. This topic of technology and innovation is something that we should be working on all the time. I think it is something that we can focus on more easily in down economic times. But both in boom times and in down times, I've been pounding the table that we at our peril ignore this topic, and it's not just losing our competitive edge vis-a-vis other countries, but in our economy, we always need to be replenishing the value chain and adding new businesses and new products and new services at the top end of the value chain. That's how we grow our economy. As Robert has said numerous times, it is responsible for a majority of the economic growth since World War II. And we put that kind of growth at peril by not engaging in high-level education and training, and also in not efficiently transferring that technology, and not just bringing it out of the labs, but actually turning it into jobs, products, and services here in the United States. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So we'll turn now to Christina. I should mention, Congressman Wu alluded to a study by Erica Fuchs at Carnegie Mellon, which is a really great study. I don't know if it's public or not, but actually going to be doing an event with Erica sometime late November, early December to release that study, and it'll be on our website. But very fascinating work about how globalization affects the generation of new technology. So with that, we've been waiting to hear about this proposal. So Christina, if you can enlighten us.
High expectations. Yeah, this is great. And thank you so much, Congressman Wu, Rob Atkinson, Gutenberg, everybody here for coming. Clearly, this is something that's very interesting to people. And well, we have a challenge and we have an opportunity before us. Every year, the federal government invests $150 billion in research every year. At the same time, in 10 years, somehow we need to create 10 million jobs. So how are we going to bridge that gap? And what I'd like to suggest is that it's not just about creating jobs, it's also about creating new products and services for better quality of life, and it's also about better competitiveness for America, so globally. And I think that the key, and I think a lot of you would agree, the key is to leverage the existing assets that we have in our research universities. So this proposal that many of you picked up has three main components. So the first component is to focus on universities as the nexus of local ecosystems, innovation ecosystems. The second part is for these local ecosystems to nurture a culture and skills for lifelong innovation and entrepreneurship, not just to focus on the individual ideas that are in front of us today. And third, to provide the resources to enable innovators to turn their ideas into real impact, societal impact and economic impact. And part of the resources that I'm talking about, as Tom earlier alluded to, were proof of concept funds that would help prove either technological feasibility or market feasibility of an idea that's really in its early stages and it's too early for the business community to really latch onto and to invest in. But I also want to stress that it's really much more than proof of concept funding. It's really about developing that community. It's about the mentoring, the educational aspects. And it's really programmatic support in order to engage the best and the brightest from both within the universities and outside the universities. And so you may wonder, why am I so interested in it? And I think part of it is I'm not an academic by background. I'm actually an entrepreneur and engineer, as Rob mentioned, that then ended up starting the Deshpande Center for Technological Innovation at MIT, and now I'm at USC running the USC Stevens Institute for Innovation. And I've seen firsthand this, the gap between universities and the marketplace and how challenging that is to really make that kind of a connection. And I want to emphasize that it's not just a linear connection either. It's really an iterative process, and there's a feedback loop there. It's not just one way. And so that's really important to keep in mind. I've seen breakthrough ideas for clean energy, for medicine, the environment. It's too risky for investment, or no one to champion those ideas, maybe not the right kind of background. In fact, for example, a professor who really should have no reason to know what makes a good business model or a good business partner, end up with the wrong business partner because maybe he's an investment banker. Well, he understands business, gets partnered up to try to do a cancer treatment that could be life-changing, and it gets stuck because the structure of the company is wrong, the skills are wrong. And so these are the sort of things where there's a lot of education that needs to take place and a lot of coaxing. And so that's what we're talking about, is how do we gap that, what people call the valley of death. And again, but it's not just a valley one way, but it's really a process and it's a culture barrier. So that said, universities have served a critical role in the innovation ecosystem in this country. Latest data from a couple years ago, in 2007, 555 spin-out companies out of university IP, 666 products were brought to market. This does not even come close to including all the alumni that learned wonderful skills in entrepreneurship and innovation that went on to create companies as well. So we're really undercounting that, the impact of the universities. And also does not include the non-intellectual property aspects, the student startups and the ideas. For example, We have a professor who's working on these photonovellas to help educate folks that don't speak English at all and may not understand the risks of diabetes and cardiac disease, heart disease, and using photonovellas in order to get that word out and possibly get circulations out there, hundreds of thousands of people understanding these sort of things. This is not based on tech transfer alone. The impact is much broader than that. So some universities have definitely started to take a much more active role, much more proactive role in trying to stimulate that innovation. We've had many success stories, and as Tom was saying, we have a lot of promising practices. And I think that a lot of this is driven by state funding, donors. Of course, the state funding is drying up. And I think what I would say, and the colleagues who have helped me on this proposal as well, would say that this should not be left to chance. We cannot leave this process, which is absolutely critical to American competitiveness, to our economy, to jobs, to product services, to quality of life, and we should not be leaving this to whether somebody is willing to give a gift to a university or whether there might be some sort of state funding available. We really need to systematize this process and scale it. And so what this proposal calls for are 10 demonstration projects to start with that would invest in innovation locally. The universities would play a convening role in this process, and then develop best practices and metrics so that a phase 2 later on would be able to be scaled across universities across the country and can maximize their impact. And I definitely want to emphasize the metrics part, because I think that a lot of the challenges that we've had in some cases when people complain about maybe Bayh-Dole needs to be tweaked, et cetera, a lot of it is, what are we measuring? And in the past, we've measured licensing revenue to the universities. We've measured the number of patents. These metrics do not have any strong bearing to the actual impact that the universities are having. For example, one of our alumni found out at USC was one of the founders of Earth Day. That's an amazing impact. But we're not measuring that by measuring patents or by measuring licensing revenue to the universities. Licensing revenue is fantastic to support the research back in the university, and so I don't want to discount the importance of that. But the universities already are looking at that. We don't need to put more emphasis on that. We really need to focus on things like jobs created, companies created, outside investment into companies that are spun out, product revenue, the actual economic impact in the environment. We also need to talk, like Congressman Wu said, it should be a service to the faculty. We should be looking at service metrics. The libraries are not expected to generate revenue, but they're really important to the universities. And we should also be looking, and this is much more challenging, to the more societal impact aspects and to our alumni successes. Because if we create an innovator today, maybe their idea today is not going to make impact. But if they come back next year, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, and create a MySpace or a Google or an Amgen or whoever, these are the sort of things that we really want to have happening in our future, and are really critical to our country. So I kind of think of that as that's the guiding principle that we have at USC. We look university-wide. Our institute supports innovators from all 18 schools. We don't just focus on university-based IP, even though tech transfer is very important. And so I like to think of it sort of as a university innovation 2.0. It's the next frontier. So I hope that if nothing else, in addition to hopefully having this sort of a policy implemented, and I look forward to hearing your feedback on what is the best way to articulate this in policy so that we move forward, but also if we can help inspire the community to look at universities as really a critical piece of innovation really broadly. So thanks.
Great, thank you.
George.
Let me just do a minute or so on the Chesapeake Crescent Initiative, just to let you know where I come from. The Chesapeake Crescent Initiative was launched in January 2008 by the two governors, O'Malley and King, along with the mayor of D.C., together with the federal government, Steny Hoyer from the Democratic side, Tom Davis, and Congressman from Virginia from the Republican side, as well as OMB and GSA. And its objective is to build innovation capacity and perform this region, that is the 3-state region, You may not know that while Greater Washington is the largest single concentration of federal workers, Baltimore is number 2 in the country, and Tidewater is number 3. So we have an enormous federal footprint here in terms of federal labs and in terms simply of the operating environment that the federal government creates up and down all 3 states. And the federal government is obviously interested in having that environment be as innovative and the culture of the 3-state region as innovative as possible. So we have formed, this particular issue is of vital importance to this region. We have $26 billion a year spent in federal R&D in this region, R&D total in this region. And we are 37th in commercializing that as we measure ourselves against the rest of the country. So we have great innovative potential and very little innovative performance in the terms that Christina's been talking about in terms of getting it out of our research facilities. We've created a Chesapeake Crescent Innovation Alliance, which makes up 9 universities: Johns Hopkins, University of Maryland system, George Washington University, Georgetown, Howard University, George Mason University of Virginia, Virginia Tech, James Madison, and with the multiple colleges of University of Maryland system, over 20 campuses, colleges, and probably 30 or more campuses. Every one of the institutions is working on this problem, some more successfully than others. Johns Hopkins made a lot of progress in the last year, 12 startup companies, $76 million in capital following those companies. Virginia and Virginia Tech have been in partnership and running this inside of Virginia. University of Maryland at College Park probably does an enormous amount of work here too in terms of what it's been able to do in startups. So we have universities in this region across the board that are deeply engaged in this particular point. I would like to say at the outset, I think Z's, interesting nickname, Z. It's like X, but you know, she's gone beyond X. Endorse Tom Khalil's comments, and I endorse some very important elements that she talks about. This is largely a cultural issue. It's not just the universities, it's the surrounding entrepreneurs, the VCs, and other intellectual capital that exists around these universities. In this particular region, we have the highest concentration of scientists and engineers anywhere in the universe. And yet that innovative potential not yet exploited is just a bit of a cultural problem in this region. I also very much endorse her notion of the importance of place, the notion that somehow the efforts with universities ought to be related to the cluster economics of the region, I think is vital, because those cluster economics can create business incubators, they can create a variety of expertise in a variety of different either functional areas or sectoral areas, which can be extraordinarily useful in fostering the movement and speed of movement and volume of movement of intellectual property out of universities. There are some parallel efforts that I just highlight that we are involved in this region. The federal labs are important across this country. They're important in this region. There's 70 of them. They're enormously valuable. A lot of the sectors and cluster economics of this region are driven in part by federal labs. Fort Detrick and its bio capabilities is an enormous driver in the health science area. Fort Meade will be an enormous driver in the security area. So we have federal labs here that, in our view, need to be taken into account as one figures out how to move intellectual property out of the federal R&D spend and move it into the marketplace. The other thing that I'd emphasize is the executive branch. Parallel efforts need to be taken in addition to the approaches that Z is recommending. In the executive branch, OMB has issued budget guidance for the fiscal 11 budget, which asks its agencies to give it feedback on how research and development investment might be more productively used by talking to people who actually make and do things, their words. Talk to people who make things, talk to people who do things, and give us feedback on how your expenditures are going to be better made more productive in terms of creating jobs in the economy. So the executive branch, just through its budgeting authority, through OMB, can have an enormous weight in how these issues are approached and the way federal labs approach their particular export of technology. Now, just with some quick comments on Z's approach. I like it so much, I think it has to be much larger. I don't think the scale of this program at 20 million a year really fits the size and scale of the problem that we confront. The United States had 50% of the world's GDP right after the Second World War. It's now in the low 20s and going down. And that is not because we're shrinking, but because the rest of the globe is much more competitive. Investing in science and engineering students, investing in their population, investing in a variety of sectors, and $20 million a year ain't going to get at the problem that we're confronting here with the way that we're not making adequate use of the $150 billion a year that the federal government is spending in basic R&D. So I would urge ZU to consider, this is a political issue, and Congressman Wu can comment on this, but I think the program is too small. My second set of comments actually go to the structure of the proposal. The proposal contemplates the Commerce Department and EDA administering a set of grants to 10 universities around the country. I fear that if there were 10 universities geographically diverse across the country for political reasons, that we would have one university in this region get a $10 million grant and apply it in whatever is $2 million a year, 5 years, right? Apply it as, and just put it into their normal process. And probably in this region, Johns Hopkins University would be the natural candidate because it gets the bulk of federal R&D in this region. And at least would have the best argument for why it is that an application of money there would accelerate exports of capital. But I would suggest that we take 15 to 20 regions across the country, create regional vehicles in each of those regions, and invest broadly across the university systems in those regions. While Johns Hopkins University may be the largest recipient, the University of Maryland system does extraordinary work in nanotechnology and some other energy projects. Old Dominion University, not even a member of the Chesapeake Crescent Innovation Alliance, is one of the nation's leaders in simulation and modeling. There are, all of these universities have a variety of programs in which they're trying to commercialize their product, and therefore I think you get much greater impact and you get much a broader application of changing the culture of universities if in fact we broaden this and created regional vehicles. I think regional vehicles also would provide greater absorptive capacity for the amount of money I'm suggesting we need for this program. If in fact you had 20 regions and did $20 million a year, that's $400 million a year times 5 years would be $2 billion. That's not incomparable to, I mean, look at the $150 billion we spend, just $2 billion in a useful investment to make annually in turning that $150 billion into jobs and workforce in the economy. I would make part of the grant to a regional vehicle, I'll have to talk about it in a second, part of that grant almost per capita and part of it competitive. So that a region that comes up with the best plan for transferring technology out of universities, and I would say federal labs, but just universities, would get a higher dollop of investment money. I use the analogy of what we've done in the Department of Homeland Security, where there are 50 urban area security initiative regions around the country. Part of the allocation of Department of Homeland Security monies to those programs is per capita, part of it is competitive, and competitive based upon whether or not the region has come up with a wise investment plan to fill the gaps in Homeland Security capacity. No reason we could not make regions competitive in coming up with competitive proposals and how they're going to close the gap in transfer structures and processes. So I would make part of it per capita and I'd make part of it competitive. I would also suggest that regional vehicles can quickly come together and that they will end up being encouraging collaboration. Like we have in Homeland Security, we have now a unified effort across all 3 states, 3 jurisdictions, DC, Maryland, and Virginia. I think it would quickly come together around these regions, and I think you would include the states, because the states have their own vehicles for investing in startup companies within the states. I would include entrepreneurs and I would include venture capitalists, so that in fact you have on these bodies not only representatives of the university, presumably of the federal government, but also entrepreneurs and venture capitalists. And I think that would force a different set of collaborative spirit across these institutional boundaries, which is mightily needed. I also think that a regional vehicle would be a better fit with understanding the cluster economics of regions. Administering this out of the federal government risks the fact that you're going to have one element of the federal government deciding what's the right cluster to develop regionally, and another element of the federal government deciding which universities ought to get these grants. Now, it's possible that you'll combine them, but the footprint of one is going to be different from the footprint of the other. And I think if you do this by regions, you will be able to get the footprint of your cluster economics and the university transfer of technology to be a much tighter and better fit, as well as obviously the collaborative effort of putting the regional vehicles together. So I have those basically 4 or 5 comments on the proposal. Ought to be larger. I think it ought to work through regional vehicles and bringing about better collaboration, a greater degree of state and entrepreneurial involvement, tighter fit with cluster economics, and have a greater chance of changing the culture of all of our regions, and not just the culture of a particular university. Having said all that, and that sounds critical, I don't mean it to be critical, because I do think the Z has focused on something that I think is incredibly important for this country because of the decline in our position in the world, and because, in fact, this is a problem of enormous scale and urgency. Thank you.
Great. We've got. Thank you, George. I'll want Z to comment on George's comments, but before we do that, Congressman Wu's got a few minutes before he has to run and save the SPIR program, improve it. So if there's any comments for Congressman Wu, we could, if you could identify yourself, sir, hold on until the mic comes over.
I'm Dean Chang from the University of Maryland, and I'm thrilled that actually we have this many people actually on Capitol Hill talking about this issue that I'm very passionate about. But my question is really about, and some of this is touched on already, so we talked about technology commercialization, venture creation, the need to create a culture, and Z explicitly mentioned about things like entrepreneurship education. And I'm thrilled with the proposal. I think it's fantastic. But it does focus more on the technology commercialization. So the entrepreneurship education piece, no real details about how do we teach entrepreneurs, really weave that into a syllabus of the 21st century, if you will, of a mix of technology, business, and entrepreneurship, which is really essential to this country. And then the recently announced Office of Entrepreneurship and Innovation, they do talk about entrepreneurship education, although I didn't see any mention of universities anywhere in any of the things I read about it. So where does that responsibility really lie? Is it content education together on that? Should the proposal be expanded to include that? I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, I looked at what makes a restaurant successful in Portland, Oregon for quite some time. The only commonality I could find is that breakfast places have to have large windows. And looking across the scope of successful high-tech companies, the commonality that I found was that the founders got along well with each other, and frequently they had access to trusted advice. It was frequently family advice that was called in for free. And these were the companies that managed to stay independent and grew to substantial size. And that was true of a whole cohort of high-tech companies. What I mean to address by this is, if you look at core competencies, it's not clear that the federal government can be very effective at teaching entrepreneurship. because it's not in the DNA of bureaucracies. If you were to fund 10 companies and 7 go bankrupt, 2 go steady state, and 1 really takes off, that's a venture capital success, and it's a governmental failure. I said we delivered 10 Social Security checks, and 9 didn't get there, but boy, we gave the 10th person 60 times what they should have gotten. That really illustrates the difference in culture. So the core competency of government, I think, is funding research, bringing together collaborative groups like George's, funding university groups, and then also having some efforts to address structural failure in the system. That is, if seed round financing is short, then we ought to look at how to that up. There's a lot of discussion about this gap in funding. Before now today, VCs step up at a much higher funding level. Things like the Technology Innovation Program, SBIR, and so on may get companies across that gap. And finally, probably the most important step that we can take is what this society has been doing for 50, 60 years, 40, 50 years, but maybe we're not doing enough of it now, and that is funding, subsidizing higher education and subsidizing research. I'll try to be quicker.
I think we have time for one more question for the Congressman. If you can identify yourself, please.
Good morning. Congratulations on a great meeting.
Thank you.
Terrific. I'm Dan Lowe with the Capital Formation Institute. The question I have is, how can we make government policy mirror the private sector process and innovation? And we talk about innovation like it's one thing, but you have innovation as is practiced by Procter & Gamble, which is a terrifically innovative way to get new products in the marketplace. And we have innovation like SBIR, which is finding companies down here and bringing them up as quickly as we can, push them into the marketplace. It's all kinds of innovation. And so the same thing goes for the market. So when I hear discussions about collaboration, that sort of thing, then I'm thinking to myself, where's the focus in the development of policy in promoting innovation? We have to at least mirror the processes. So I'd ask you, Congressman, if you have some thoughts on that.
I'm going to think about that further, but I'm not sure that we want the public process to mirror the private sector. The private sector is good at what the private sector does, and we need to find out what it is that the public sector needs to do to spur innovation. And some of the things I cited earlier about funding research and pushing support out there.
I don't mean duplicate, I'm sorry. I don't mean duplicate. I mean at least be consistent with.
Well, so some of the structures are there, and we need to figure out what we can do better, what we can do more of. So the funding for research, the funding for graduate education, as well as a substantial subsidy, I think, for undergraduate and other forms of education. Those are sort of base building blocks. The financial building blocks are things like the SBIR program or TIP. An illustration of what's needed is that right now NIH is funded at about, call it $35 billion a year. NASA is funded at, call it $17 billion a year. Department of Energy research is at $3 billion a year. If you look at what we need to do in terms of energy, there is no way that a regulatory approach, a penalty approach, will get us to where we want to go, because a democratic political, small d democracy cannot impose enough pain on the economic system to get to where it goes. It blows up the political system. And some thoughtful people say that we need 10 times the energy research to on the order of $30 billion a year to get to the energy future that we need to get to. That is something that government can do very well. It may take moving resources from somewhere else, or it may take, euphemistically, revenue enhancers. to be able to do that. But that is a core competency of this institution, and it's something that we can do. It's very different from what the private sector does, but it's also very important. I can stretch out to 10:20 if we wanted to do more.
Okay, thank you. You know what, Scott, I'm gonna go there because you've already had one. I won't let someone else who hasn't had a chance. So you hold on to the mic and identify yourself, please.
Hi, Brian Dormady from the University of Maryland. This is really
Is everyone here from the thing on the website or something?
We're local.
Okay.
But anyway, so 2 years ago, the Kaufman Foundation came out with a proof of concept paper, and so I looked at that, and actually, this hasn't been publicly announced, but we put together a $3.5 million proof of concept alliance that tracks many of what you have outlined in the paper. I didn't know your paper was being conducted then. But anyway, so it is going to be regional. It is going to be across the system, across the state of Maryland. So we just got the money. It was in the Defense Appropriations Bill. So Defense Appropriations is a very useful vehicle. But anyway, this will be rolled out starting early next year, and so it will be a pilot project. So I just wanted to let you know about this, and hopefully some of the metrics we learned from this. And we're utilizing Dean Chang from the Venture Accelerator at Maryland and some other assets. So we're trying to leverage existing assets and putting some gap funding in for the Proof of Concept Alliance. So anyway, and just one other comment to Congressman Wu. So one other thing, I'm president of the Association of University Research Parks, the incoming president. And one thing we've been looking at is the internal R&D at federal labs, like George Bradenberg has mentioned. And universities have changed their models in tech transfer since Beigel in the last 20 years. That hasn't been replicated on the federal lab level. And so, you know, we've been coming up with some strategies to suggest a more efficient process for federal tech transfer from internal R&D. So I hope we'll share our paper with you, and hopefully they'll stimulate some ideas.
Well, I really look forward to that. The STTR program is partially aimed at federal labs, and there are other programs for the federal labs, but in my impression is that you have these universities doing a reasonable job of tech transfer, but the federal labs are almost silent, and that is an underutilized resource, and we need to activate that. And my final comment is the fact that so many University of Maryland people are here validates George's concept of the importance of place. The challenge for Oregon has been that our universities, Oregon State and the University of Oregon, are respectively, they're both about 2 hours away from the Portland metro area. Our major research medical institution is in Portland, but if your research facility doesn't sit on the grid of services and expertise and recruiting talent for executives, it doesn't work nearly as well. So I am very jealous of NIH, University of Maryland, and all the other universities that are available in this area, and the fact that USC is in the middle of Southern California.
But I am a duck, so I'm representing. Wise move. So I think with that, Congressman does have to go, and we really appreciate you, first of all, joining us this morning and then spending your valuable time with us. So.
Well, thank you very much. I don't even like this conference report, but I got to keep
We're going to adjourn no later than 10:40, and we're going to have plenty of time for other folks to ask questions or make comments. But I wanted to just give Z a couple of minutes to respond to George's proposal or comment. If I were Z, I'd be very happy. I'd say, hey, we'll have the conference go, well, it went well. The good news is that there was a proposal to increase my funding levels by 66 times. So that's the message I would.
But the problem is there's no actual funding yet. But, well, thank you very much for your comments. And I agree, I think it's too small. And I think that the goal of this was to create, as Tom was kind of pointing out, is something that was practical to start with. And it was really meant as a pilot to develop the best or promising practices and the metrics, and very quickly roll out to a phase 2 that would go, you know, mushroom across the country. Because I think that I think for this to be successful, you do need to have the right metrics, and you do need to have some sort of a guiding principles. And I don't know that this document, as much as as much time as we all put into it, is enough. So I think that it would be important to have a smaller number of individuals that are really committed to the process. So that's the way I was looking at it. Now, maybe the best way to do it is to present it as something, really grand and say, this is where we want to go, and the first step is this. I don't know, what would be, what the reaction would be, if it would be better or not. I do agree that regions are very important. I think that there needs to be a balance. I think that the universities in a region, and I can also speak to Los Angeles, UCLA and Caltech are really great collaborators for us, and together we do over $1.6 billion in research every year, just our 3 universities, not to mention the others. And so it is very important to have that kind of collaboration. So I think ultimately what would be interesting to see as this plays out, if we do get the pilot, is to start then figuring out are there mechanisms for the collaboration between the universities, have a few of the sites that may be multiple universities together, but at the same time I feel like individual universities have very strong identities. They have their own brand that is very powerful. I think that's one of the great things universities bring to the table, is that they have this brand. They have, some of them, been around for over 100 years, and they're not going to go away tomorrow. And then they bring their huge alumni base. We at USC have email addresses for 250,000 alumni. That's just an unbelievable resource. So I think that what I'd like to see is some sort of a balance where it is a regional approach where we work together, and at the same time the individual universities do have the opportunity to leverage their brand. I totally agree on the collaborations, and I think that the basic idea behind how do you select, once a university would receive a grant, a project, a program, and then would then be selecting the projects they wanted to focus on, or be doing mentoring, et cetera, they would definitely engage entrepreneurs, venture capitalists. That's the way that we did it at the Deshpande Center, and we'll be doing it at USC. Absolutely critical. It should not be university administrators doing this. I'm a university administrator now, so I can make fun of us. I think it's extremely important to bring in the different perspectives. So that's, I think, for now, that's how I'd like to respond to your comments.
Just one comment. Valerie Jarrett came to an interesting meeting here in the Washington area with local political leaders. And this goes in parts to the question about innovation in governance. She said that when she was working as a Chicago planner, one of the most frustrating things that, in her experience, was trying to deal with the federal government with multiple agencies and multiple programs per agency, and trying to fit your local context into this stream of agencies and programs. And that what she has started is an internal review within the government, how to turn that upside down so that the federal government responds to the regional context. And basically, she said she would begin to look to regions to develop business plans or approaches in particular areas, or broadly, about how they want to approach a variety of subjects, and then have the federal government's programs respond to that, or be flexible enough to respond to that. Which means that not all of this is going to be top-down. This goes to the question of should the Commerce Department administer this directly with the university, or whether we ought to, or universities ought to, or coalitions of universities ought to, at a regional level, come up with plans on how they would like to change the culture of their region through a variety of mechanisms and through a variety of funding, and both programmatic funding and early stage capital funding and other things, so that in fact this doesn't end up being a set of metrics that the Department of Commerce designs and it's got its own constraints, but that each region can come back to a Department of Commerce, for example, and say, this is how we would approach this problem. The problem is not, how do I spend this money? The problem is, how do I create an innovative culture in my region? And thus have the regions speak to the federal government about that, because it may take a different cast at MIT, Southern California, and here in the federal government region. It just may have a different feel, a different mix of programs, and having a one-size-fits-all program out of the Department of Commerce, it seems to me, risks missing the diversity of America. But just a comment on whether this is bottom up or top down.
Right here, the lady right here.
pairing with the University of California, San Diego. Yeah, so we've been at this for quite a while and have a very similar configuration of what you're talking about in the San Diego region. And it had matured to the point in this region, this culture, that what we're looking at now is developing the regional economic analytics, the measures on many different levels for what makes it work and how we'll do better in the future in selecting what innovation clusters we're going after. And this is not just a university, it's a whole network of networked associations of collaborators on La Jolla Mesa, where we reside at the University of California, with several other major research engines. It's a very closely networked affiliation. And I think that's the merit in what Z's proposal is, in that starting on a smaller scale, maybe developing, giving us an opportunity, those who've been at it, like Deshpande, we have the Von Liebig Center on our campus, which has been a proof of concept entity, very successful. Maybe giving us a chance, those who've been at it for a while in the regional complex, to develop these metrics and really be able to share them. Because while I agree everyone wants to do it on a very large scale, and it's a great idea, it might be good to have at least the basics of what has worked in some of these different environments. We're very different from MIT in that region, but I think there's learning that has already acquired that can be useful.
Connect was one of the early efforts in this area and widely admired.
And it works.
So we go over, we'll go over here, and then here's going to run Priscilla all around, so here.
Hi, Stacy Rostauskas with Ohio State. Want to make sure that we'll talk about football. So I want to ask, I know federal relations for the university, so ask a little bit more about why you chose the Department of Commerce over other agencies. When I talk to my faculty members on campus, they're very familiar with NSF, with NIH. If I went to them and said, what do you think about commerce? They would probably look at me and say, where's that? How do I get there? So can you talk a little bit more about that? And
That's actually part of the reason.
Okay.
Because I think we wanted to shake things up a little bit. I think that if people felt too comfortable that, oh, this is just another source of research funding, it would not serve its purpose. There's definitely pros and cons. I'm not a policy expert, but I've gotten great advice from Toby Smith, for example, AU and APLU, and folks in government relations and other folks. And I think that we can do a bunch of things. And this is just a proposal, but the idea was let's drive it based on the end impact. We want to create jobs, we want to create products and services. Understanding has not traditionally looked as much at the innovation side and has been looking more at traditional industries, but now I'm very encouraged with the new Office for Innovation and Entrepreneurship that's being headed up by Esther Lee, and also the Regional Innovation Clusters proposal that's floating around and looks like it's getting some traction. I think that there's definitely interest now in this direction, and so if we can help shape that a bit more and make sure that the value of the universities is represented in that, I think that there'd be a lot of value. At the same time, I've had a great relationship with NSF, for example, and other organizations, and I think that we definitely want to have, if nothing else, they definitely need to be involved and provide their input, because they've had a lot of experience with, at least from the SBIR standpoint and NSF, about how do you help transition some of the ideas out. So I think that there's a lot of folks that can be involved all around.
I think right here, I'd second Z's point, though. I think members are much more likely to look favorably at something out of EDA where they can say, this is all about jobs, and that's really what EDA is all about. And it's all about regions, and to George's point. So I think EDA in some way, given the fact that members are going to be able to, a lot of members don't necessarily have NSF connections, but most of them a lot of them have EDA connections, and I think it's a broader decision. So, yes, sir.
Good morning. My name is Al Soyster. I'm a former PI Engineering Dean, and now I work at NSF. And in particular, part of my responsibility are the engineering research centers.
These centers were created, started back in 1984. I can imagine a similar meeting in 1984 where the issue of innovation was a hot topic as the Japanese cars were getting foothold in the U.S. So NSF created this partnership of research centers where universities are now, teams of universities submit ideas to our foundation in great connection with the industry. Since its inception in 1984, I think there's been 53 engineering research centers. We get hundreds of proposals on a 2-year basis to do this. And in some recent numbers, we calculated easily $10 billion worth of products and services have been constructed out of these engineering research centers. I mention this because of the proposals that you have. Certainly, we certainly think this is a wonderful idea. And I think some of the experience, data, and kind of techniques that have been successful over the years in connecting with university establishments is terribly important because there's a heritage of, I think, great interest in this. So I'd be suggesting that maybe there should be a collaboration that we could try to help with.
Maybe some of the $2 billion that George is going to get us working with Mr. Hoyer could go there because the ERC program is a fantastic program and dramatically underfunded. I don't know if the funding hasn't gone up that much, and I think it's a great program. So to me, a lot of this is all about, there are people who say there's one thing we got to do, SBIR. This is about a complex system, and it's about a whole set of things we got to do. We got to do better at engineering research centers. We got to do better at these cluster initiatives. We got to do better at some of the early stage venture funding, the commercialization, a whole set of things. Research parks, Senator Pryor has a bill on research parks. So we really need to do all of these things and build this innovation ecosystem at the regional level that's stronger. We'll go here and then here.
Morgan Reed with ACT and the Innovators Network. Also represent, I'll be here for the PAC-10 as well, getting out of the Maryland. I love how everybody's been talking about how great the universities are that they represent and the great job that they're doing. A question I have, I guess, is to flip it on its head. We work with a lot of innovators who find that university tech transfer offices have a lottery ticket mentality about the intellectual property that they hold. And we are huge supporters of intellectual property, and it's incredibly valuable. How do you see your program working to educate the other direction and helping to get TTOs to understand that they need to look at more creative ways to successfully transfer the technology rather than hoping to have the next Genentech or, in the case of Berkeley, the next EOLAS patent? I mean, those are great, but how do we get those ones that might have a longer window, and how do we change the culture at the TTO office?
Well, I hope that by starting small and starting to grow, we set into place certain guidelines, metrics. Some of them are already set out in this proposal. And I think that some of the challenges come because you might have folks that are more contracts oriented versus business development oriented. You have offices that are underfunded. And it really is, it's very difficult. So it's funny because, of course, I come from the outside, now coming in, and part of what my institute does, we also manage the intellectual property for the university, and all of a sudden I say, I understand how difficult this is. I mean, this is actually really complicated, and so there's a lot of different stakeholders in the process. But I think that, again, I just want to reiterate the fact that it's a lot of it's about the metrics, and I think that 364 days of, yeah, let's make some societal impact, but then if the president comes back and says, okay, on the last day, they say, okay, how much money did you make? Then you're not going to change that mentality. And so if we stop measuring externally what the licensing revenue is, which happens to be very, it's a power law, it's very, not completely random, but, and if we stop measuring the number of patents, but instead we measure societal impact, the economic development that's created, and the services, I think that will make a huge difference. I think that a lot of it is in having role models as well, and not having those role models just be someone, NYU getting this huge core settlement, for example, but it's something more, it may be more subtle, which is harder to quantify, but I think that we can do it.
Okay, I think we have time for one more comment or question. Yes, sir. Right there.
Thank you. I'm Paul Zielinski. I'm from NIST. I have a question for you. Putting aside the funding issue, is there something coming out of the federal tech transfer offices which might be able to support these efforts, or that you feel is lacking from the federal tech transfer offices?
George, you want to take that one?
Well, our experience here has been there hasn't been a lot coming out of the federal tech transfer offices, with a couple of exceptions, NASA being one, Department of Agriculture, interesting, being another. There's a lot of black box stuff that goes on, at least in this region, which is very highly protected by the federal government. Their mission in the federal labs is to serve their federal customers, and their mission has nothing to do with taking what they're doing and finding a way to create jobs and employment other than outside of their own lab. One of the things, if you look outside the scope of this particular proposal, one might do is to say to the federal government that in its procurement practices, an element of the procurement that we're going to enter into with you with respect to the black box we need here at DHS or DOD is what commercializable opportunities there are, or to what extent you are using off-the-shelf technology that exists in the marketplace in order to develop the product or system that you're dealing with us on. Why is that important? Because it will extend the market for whatever it is that the government's buying, and thus hopefully reduce the government's cost in the longer term. It will also, either by absorbing stuff in the marketplace or requiring specialized, customized systems or products to have a commercial application, create some federal commercializable activity out of procurement. So we work not only on the lab side, where we're not seeing a whole lot of tech transfer, but we're also working on the procurement side here to figure out whether or not that element would be consistent with, and how it could be made consistent with, federal procurement of what the federal government actually needs as a customer. So, you know, there's some unique pieces of this region because we have all the agencies here that buy very high-tech products. We have labs and universities that produce very high-tech IP. How do we create companies that link that particular ecosystem here?
Great. So let me just close by saying a couple things. Some of you, I think, are maybe new to ITIF, so I encourage you to go on our website, which is itif.org or innovationpolicy.org. There's lots of things there, podcasts and event announcements, things like that. So also you can sign up for email. I think he's going to, Z is going to send the 250,000 emails to us so we can put them on our email list. So anyway, with that, as I said, I think this is a great proposal, and I'm encouraged not only that Z and her colleagues have come forward with this, but I think that there's really an increasing receptivity now, both in Congress and the administration, for these kinds of ideas. And the real challenge, as George alluded to, is going to be the money and how we can get there. So with that, please join me in thanking George.